extra hours. You got to work Saturday, Sunday. Little did I remember that, but I am ready. I'm ready to preach the word this morning no matter what. If you could turn 1 Samuel chapter 17. 1 Samuel chapter 17. Anybody heard the story of David and Goliath? Raise your hand. All right, so it's not a story that many of us have not heard. It's a story that many of us are familiar with, and we're going to talk through it, and we're going to learn so much from it this morning. Are you ready to learn this morning? All right, and I want you to be happy because the Word of God says, I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. So is anybody glad? Anybody happy to be here this morning? All right, could you nudge your neighbor and say, be happy? All right, 1 Samuel chapter 17. We're going to start at the end, verse 48 to 53. You can read it in your Bible. You can read it up here, and I'm going to read from here. It says, verse 48, Then it happened when the Philistine rose and came and drew near to meet David, that David ran quickly. Everybody say quickly. Quickly towards the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand into his bag and took from it a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. And the stone sank into his forehead so that he fell on his face to the ground. Thus David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and he struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in David's hand. Then David, listen, I love the Bible. David ran and stood over the Philistine. Take that. And took his sword, drew it out of his teeth, and killed him, cut his head off with it. Wow. When the Philistines saw that their champion, everybody say champion, because we're going to talk about that. Say champion really loud. Champion. Yeah. Was dead, they fled. Verse 52, the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines as far as the valley and the gates of Ekron, and the slain Philistines lay along the way to Sarim, even Gath and Ekron. The sons of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines and plundered their camps. And check this out. Look at the last verse. David took the Philistine's head, brought it into Jerusalem, but he put his weapons, he goes, these are for me, in his tent. All right. May God bless his word this morning. The title of my message this morning is The Man Between. The Man Between. If you're taking notes, The Man Between is my message this morning. So let me tell you, we've all heard the story of David and Goliath. Most of us have heard it. 99% of us have heard it. And we all related to the underdog. We all related to the little one beating the big one. And I want to tell you a story. If you can show that picture of this awesome person right here. Look at that. That was about over 20 years ago, I think. Something like 1992. My high school year of football. I graduated in 93, so this was 92. Look at that. And I actually have a story, a David and Goliath story like you cannot imagine. Our team was not that good. We ended up 3-7. You know, 3-7 is not a very good, record, right? Is that good? I mean, everybody understand me? So our rival team was the Warriors, the South City Warriors. We were El Camino Colts. They were the South City Warriors. We were red, as you can see. You can take the picture off. Don't want to distract you guys, Anyway, so the South City Warriors were blue. We were red. I mean, total rivalry, red against blue. The two high schools in the city. And then we lost against them. We lost the big game was called the Bell game. We lost against them because we weren't that good that year. But the last game of the season, our 10th game, we were 2-7. We were 2-7, and we were playing against another team that was called the Warriors as well, from another city, and they were also the Warriors. And this was our redemption because we finally get to play against another team that's called the Warriors. We might actually win. But guess what? They were the Warriors, and they were also blue. So inside of us, there was something like, we're going to beat the blue Warriors. It's going to be significant. But come down to the last minute, and at the last minutes of the game, we were losing 27-28. We were losing by 1 point. Now, I do have to tell you that you can't see it in that picture, but I used to wear a soccer shoe on this side and a football high top on this one. For the picture, I wore both high tops because it was the picture. But I was the kicker as well. So it was probably my fault. I probably missed the point after the field goal. A point after the touchdown. That's why we were down by 1 point. We were losing 27-28. And the truth of the matter was that there was another kicker, which was one of my good friends, Eddie, and he kicked, and I kicked. I did kickoffs. He did some point afters, and he did some field goals. I did some. And it came down to the last minute. They were about 30 seconds left, something like that, 36, and they were trying to decide what to do. And they flipped the coin to see who would kick the field goal at the end. We were losing 27-28. And the head coach wanted my friend to kick it. The special team coach wanted me to kick it. So literally, like movie magic, they flipped the coin. Can you see the coin? Comes down. And guess what? Campos, you're in. I was like, what? I was relaxed. And you got to figure, I'm really into football now. I liked football then, and I played, and I liked it, but I like music too, so I wasn't aware of how big this would be. I knew it was big, but I didn't know how big this was. So I kind of go up, and I set myself to start kicking, and I'm looking. I'm kind of thinking like, okay, you better make it. Well, if you don't, it's just another field goal. And in my mind, but then I realized, wait a minute. This is our last game of the season against the Warriors. This could win it. This is the winning. This is movie magic. The last minute field goal, and I'm not kidding you. This is not a lie. I'm not exaggerating. I look up, and I see the clock saying 9, 8. And I yell at Anton Bader. That was the guy's name, the holder. I said, snap the ball. At that moment, it probably more like, snap the ball. And Anton looks at Jason Brook, number 74, our snapper, does this, which is the signal to snap it. He snaps it. I see it go, and I come to kick. I'll tell you the rest of the story at the end. No, just kidding. So I come to kick the ball. And I come and kick it, and the kicker's supposed to keep his head down, right? Anybody ever kick in high school? You're supposed to keep your head down so that you don't do this and shank it up or sideways. And you're supposed to keep your head down. So I kick it, but guess what I did? I had to see what was going to happen. I couldn't wait till 2 seconds out. I couldn't wait 3 seconds. I had to look, and I look up, and I saw after I kick it, I saw the most glorious, majestic duck you know what a duck is when you kick it? A spiral or a nice turn like this. Mine did not look like that. Mine looked like this. It looked like it wanted to go that way and this way. And I was like, oh, no, why did I look up? All of a sudden, I couldn't tell because there were linemen all over my face and everything. And I'm like this. I hear my team roar. I made the winning field goal with about 2 or 3 seconds left against the Warriors that were blue. Oh, my God. We won 30-28. I ran. I have no idea how fast I ran to their sideline. I taunted them. I was like, yeah, what's up? What? Yeah, man. I went crazy. All of a sudden, I see all this sea of red. My team comes. It hurt. They all jumped on me. They could have lifted me up. No, they jumped on me. All right. Worst part of it. So that means it was a David and Goliath moment. We were 2-9. Or 2-7, man. Now we're 3-7. Not whatever, but we won. David beat Goliath. They had a lineman and some linebackers whose arms were as big as my legs. They were a big team, and we had beaten them. Now, to make matters worse, I felt really bad afterwards because when we shake hands, you shake hands afterwards, good game. They gave us a soda. They gave us a Coke to drink. And at that moment, I forgot who I was playing against, but the name of the school was Valley Christian School. And so they not only said good game to us, gave us a Coke, but they gave us a track about Jesus. I felt really bad for taunting them, but we beat them, and it was a game, and David beat Goliath. So we use that analogy. We use that iconic story to use it to describe any moment where the small team beats the big team, where the underdog overcomes something seemingly impossible, circumstances or odds. The Hebrew writer here in this story, and we turn to verse 1 of chapter 17, we're going to read through the story. He does something unusual. Because usually in Hebrew writing is really quick, and this happened in the war, and they fought, and they won, or they lost, and the Lord was angry, and the Lord was happy, it's really quick. But the Hebrew writer does something really special here. He prolongs the story, kind of like what I just did right now, and I told you, and then I went up, and I yelled, and that's what the Hebrew writer is doing here. He prolongs his story because he wants us to fixate on the details of the story, on what's going on. Easily, he could have said there was a giant, and David, the little guy, came, swung the sling and the rock, and he beat him. He could have done it in one verse, but he prolongs the story. But let me tell you something. As much as we use it as a metaphor for the little beating the big, the underdog of sports team beating the one who had the upper edge, a person who beats the odds, as much as we use it for that, if we use it only like that, we miss the heart of the story, because that is not what the story is about. Although many of us, that's how we know it. We're going to learn today what this story is about. What's the context of this? So we're in chapter 17. In chapter 16, what has happened? David has just been anointed as king because God had rejected Saul. You all know what I'm talking about? God had rejected Saul for his disobedience and told Samuel, go to Jesse's house and you will anoint one of his sons. He had just been, that's the context. Saul had been rejected, and David had been anointed as king, not yet in position, but he was already the king. That's the context. So let's go to verse 1 and see what the story is like. It says, now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered in Sokah, which belongs to Judah. And they camped between Sokah and Azekah in Ephes-Dammim. It says, Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and camped in the valley of Elah, and they drew up battle array to encounter the Philistines. The Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, while Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with the valley between them. Like, what's going on? The enemy is in Sokah. Sokah is in Judah's territory. Judah is part of Israel. So the enemy this is not a confrontation like, hey, we're going to come fight. This is an invasion. They're already in their territory. Do you understand that? So the Goliaths that we're talking about today are not those little issues you have, because we're going to relate it to our life. We're going to apply it to our life. We're not talking about little issues which you can take care of. I'll deal with that later. I'll pray for that later. It's not about that. It's those things that already have invaded your life and my life. How bad? What does Judah mean? What does Judah mean? Judah comes from the word yadal in Hebrew, which means praise. Judah means praise. So we're talking about the Goliaths. We're talking about the issues in our lives that have already invaded our worship, our praise to God. What am I talking about? You get into a little argument with your spouse or with one of your kids, and you're okay. You're like, I just need to go to church and worship God because I know He can take care of it. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that argument where you're like, I don't even want to go to church today. Come on, worship God. No, I can't. Today I want to. That's the kind of Goliath I'm talking about today. That's the kind of Goliath that has invaded your worship. That's what we're up against and what we're talking about, and how to be victorious over that Goliath. See, the Philistines, who were they? They were the neighbors to the west of Israel. They camped along the Mediterranean Sea, and there were many battles. Why? Because Israel always wanted access to the Mediterranean Sea. That would bring more money in, just everything would be good for them. They were essential in warlike culture. Prostitution in their worship and aggressive military expansions were in their traits. But they had already camped, they had already invaded some of their land, and this is where the story takes place. The army stood on each side of the mountain, and there was a valley in between. Let's go to verse 4. Listen to this. Verse 4 says this. Then a champion. Say it loud. A champion. No, say champion. In Spanish, campeón. There you go. You're learning a Spanish lesson. Then a champion, campeón, came out of the armies of the Philistines, named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Listen to this. Champion here is a very, very special Hebrew word. It's only used a couple of times, and it's only in this chapter. It's a mixture, it's a mixture of the word man and between. That's why this preaching is called a man in between. The man between. The champion is the man between. So the champion, the man between, comes out, and it says Goliath was 6 cubits and a span. This is about 7.5 to 9 feet tall. Now, I don't know, I'm not sure who the tallest one is. I believe you are, one of you guys. But nobody here is over 7 feet, right? Have you met anyone over 7 feet? Have you been to the basketball games? And you see all this, and you see these tall guys. I remember I played trumpet, and so I played in a band that we played for the University of San Francisco's basketball team, and we played on the second floor, where all the fans were, and there were fans on the bottom. We played up here, and one day we got to go to the bottom, and from up here they looked normal. I remember one day we got to play on the floor, and when we went up there, the same guys that I looked at from up there were like this big, and I was like, holy, who are you? How's the air up there? They were so tall, but that's probably only like 6'5", 6'8", maybe 7 feet tall. Goliath was from 7.5 to 9 feet tall. He was huge. He was really big. And let's see what it says about him. Verse 5 through 7 explains his armor. Look at this. Three verses the Hebrew writer takes to explain in detail his armor. He says he had a bronze helmet on his head. He was clothed with a scale armor, which weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze. That's 125 pounds. Can you imagine running with something and fighting with something that weighs 125 pounds on you of metal? He also had a bronze greaves on his legs and bronze javelins slung between his shoulders. This would be a great movie. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the head of his spear, just the head of his spear, weighed 600 shekels of iron. That's about 15 to 25 pounds. And his shield carrier also walked before him. So not only was he all protected, but he had someone in front of him with a shield to protect him as well. But why does the writer, why in Hebrew literature it is not usually like this? Why now? I mean, if you read Adam and Eve, okay, there's no, and Adam's hair flowed with the air, with the wind, as he looked at Eve frolicking upon the lilies. It's not like that. It's Adam, tree good, tree bad. Tree eat, good. That's what the Bible is like. The Hebrew writing it's very archaic, it's very to the point. Why now? Because the Hebrew writer here wants us to get into the intimidation and the feeling that the Israelites felt at this moment. They had never faced anyone like Goliath, anyone with this stature, anyone with this armor. They were scared. They want to see, the Hebrew writer, listen, he wants to see if we learn the lesson from the chapter before. Now, I just explained the context. What had just happened in the chapter before? Anybody? David had been anointed. And let's go back. Chapter 16, verse 6 and 7 says, when all the sons entered in, he looked at Eliab, the oldest, and thought, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For God, listen to this, here's the lesson. For God sees not as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So why is the Hebrew writer writing all in detail? He wants to see if we learn the lesson. Because what is Israel most afraid of right now? The way Goliath looks. They didn't learn the lesson. They were still stuck on, so big. Oh, the shield. Oh, his arm. They were still stuck on that. It's meant to draw us into the fear of the Israelite experience to see if we learned our lesson from the previous chapter. Do not look at the outward appearance. I'm going to hurry up. Verse 8. Verse 8, he stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel and said to them, why do you come up to draw up in battle? Am I not the Philistine, and you servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will become your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall become our servants and serve us. Again, the Philistine said, listen to this, I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we might fight together. What is he doing? He shouted at Israel. He offered something to Israel that was not too common in those days, but it was done sometimes. He offered something called representative combat. Anybody see the movie Troy? When Achilles yells, Hector! Hector! Anybody remember that? No? Oh, nobody saw the movie Troy? Oh my God. So Achilles is yelling for Hector. Hector! Fight me, one-on-one. Same thing as here, one-on-one. If I win, we become your slaves. If you win, you become our slaves. Or backwards. Anyway, one-on-one representative. That's what he's proposing to Israel now. Representative, so that we don't have to shed blood. Whoever wins, the whole army will serve the other. Send out a hero who will stand in your place, a champion, a man between that will represent you. Goliath said, I defy you. Now, in this culture, that word defy was very strong. It was very, it was scornful. It was taunt. It was disgraceful. It was a serious offense in that culture. What was the response of the armies of the Lord of Israel? What was it? Verse 11. Saul and Israel heard the words of the Philistine. They were dismayed and greatly afraid. Listen to that. The answer was fear. So that's what's going on in this story. That's what David comes into right now. Now, Saul, he was a king. He said he was a man head and shoulders above the men of Israel. He was the tallest one. He was not only king, he was the tallest. He should have been leading them to battle, but he was leading them in fear. David comes into the picture, verse 12. Now David was the son of the Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah, whose name was Jesse, and he had 8 sons. And Jesse was old in days, and Saul advanced in years, and in the days of Saul, advanced in years among men. He was an older man. So why mention Ephrathite here? Ephrathite of Bethlehem. That was not David's mom. Why mention her? Now the Hebrew writer mentions her because of this. Ephrathah is a great matriarch of his clan, of David's clan. She was married to Caleb, the great warrior, whose daughter, listen to this, was one of the founders of Bethlehem. So what he's saying here, all we know about David is that he's this little kid that we didn't want. He wasn't even considered to be anointed by his dad for king. He forgot about him. Oh, yeah, we do have one more. Bring him. He's out there. We knew he was a runt. We knew he was short. We knew he was little. He wasn't grown up like Eliab, like the tallest one, the biggest one. He was the smallest one. That's all we know. But here what the Hebrew writer is telling us is that he might look small. That's what we know about him, but there's something great in him. He might look like nothing, but there's something great in him because of his lineage. He was so small, so young, he was considered a youth that was under 20. He couldn't even enlist in the army yet. That's how young he was. So let me see. Let's go to verse 18. Go down to verse 18 and see what's happening here. He says, his dad says, bring also these 10 cuts of cheese to the commander and their thousands, and look into the welfare of your brothers. Bring back news from them. For Saul and they are all men of Israel, are in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. As he comes to the battle, so we know now, as we've read and we know the story, that David is the hero, yes or no? Yeah, we know that. David didn't know that. David didn't wake up that morning, ooh, I'm going to fight Goliath today. David woke up today and turned on his Uber Eats app. He was an Uber Eats delivery guy, and he turned on his app and says, ooh, I have some cheeses to pick up from Jesse. That's my dad. And he walks in, and he picks them up. Order from Jesse to my brothers, clicks on the app, grabs it, and goes and delivers his Uber Eats. That's who David was today. He did not come in, listen to this, he didn't come in looking like a warrior. He did not come into battle looking like a king, which he already was, or a savior, or the hero. He comes looking like a servant. Ooh, that's good. He came in looking like a servant. He was Uber Eats without the high prices. Man, we were on vacation last week, and we ordered from Taco Bell because it was late at night. That was the only thing open. 3 things, $28. 28, just because we were hungry. But can you imagine that? My things were like $9. Everything else was Uber Eats charges, but I'm not going to talk about that today. So he was Uber Eats. It's in the biggest hour of our need, and the hero doesn't look impressive. He looks lowly. He looks humble. Let's go to verse 20 and verse 22. And we notice repetition in the text here, and it's important to us. It says, so David rose early in the morning, and he left the flock with a keeper and took the supplies and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the circle of the camp while the army was going on battle array, shouting the war cry. Verse 22, then David left his baggage with the care of the baggage keeper. We're going to concentrate on that real quick. So we know, David didn't know, David was going about his regular day. But we know he's going out to fulfill his destiny. We know he's going out to, this is the David and Goliath moment we've been waiting for in the story. We know where he's going. We know he's going to fulfill his destiny. But what does he do? And it's important to see why the Hebrew writer says it a couple of times. Listen to this. He says, the repetition language, he left his sheep with the keeper. Everybody say left. Okay, he left it. He left his things. Everybody say left. With the keeper, as he marched towards his destiny, he rids himself, listen, as he marches towards his destiny, he rids himself of all that held him back. A lot of us, as we walk through to our destiny, to reach our destiny, there's things we need to start leaving behind. There's things that we need to say, this is not going to help me where I'm going. This is not going to help me where I want to be, where I know God wants me to be. We learned that from David. Verse 23. So verse 23 comes on, and he's there. He goes, as he was talking to them, behold, the champion, here he comes again, the Philistine from Gath, named Goliath, said, was coming up from the army of the Philistines, and he spoke the same words, and David heard him. What were the words? I defy you, you and your armies, you and your God, I defy you. Bring one man to fight me. And David, he hadn't heard him. It said for 40 days Goliath defied the armies, but this day it was different. Why? Because David heard him. And if we were recording a movie right now, we'd go from a wide shot of Goliath going, yeah, to David saying, what did you say? Because at this moment, David was used to being in the fields with the sheep, taking care of sheep, bringing cheese, going back, Uber Eats. That's what he was used to. He knew, do not blaspheme the name of the Lord. This was probably the first time he heard someone blaspheme the name of Yahweh. And for him, who his life was God, his shepherd, the love of his life, his portion, to hear someone take his name in vain, that's why David would have said, what? Did you hear that? And to the other army guy, hey, are you guys hearing this? He is defying Yahweh. He is taking the Lord's name in vain. And David's reaction was, what's going to happen? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Verse 26, he says, verse 26, David spoke to the man who were standing with him, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt or defy the armies of the living God? What was he saying? David was saying this. You're looking at it like this. You need to put theological, or in our realm, a biblical lens on what is happening. Your situation, sometimes we look at it like this. Oh, I have no idea how I'm going to get through this. I don't know. You need to put a biblical lens on it and say, wait a minute. I have God on my side. And David comes in. They were looking at it with no lens. We're defeated. We can't go against him. Look how big he is. Look at his look. And David said, no, wait. He is uncircumcised, and we are the Lord's army. So he puts a theological, biblical lens on the problem. He says, don't worry about the height. That's not the issue. We are the people of God. We can beat him. So verse 28 and verse 30, I'm going to go fast through this because the story is long. His brothers start taunting him. Shut up, David. Shut up. Imagine if your little brother, think about it. Your little brother comes and he starts, we're going to fight him. We're going to fight. And you're kind of like, shut up, dude. Shut up. And he starts saying, and what does David do? David said, hey, it was just a question, man. I was just asking. And turns away from him. Listen, we're going to keep on going. If he would have engaged with Eliab, the oldest brother, was the one who told him, shut up, be quiet. You just come here to see us fail. If he would have engaged in a fight with Eliab, if David would have responded to him differently than he did, what did he say? It was just a question, man. Don't worry about it. Then all of his strength, all of his energy would have gone into this battle. Are you understanding? And some of us need to learn from this because we're stuck dealing with little battles that have nothing to do with the big picture. Oh, I'm going to show my husband. He didn't take out the trash? All right, I'll show him. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm going to show my wife. She can learn the lesson. Mm-hmm. I'm going to show my kids. Watch. Ooh. Our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities. You got to see the bigger picture. Oh, my fellow employee, he did that to me. You'll see. I'm going to put a whole bunch of paper in the copier. See how he likes it when he gets stuck. Oh, that's not your fight. Don't get stuck in the little battles. What would have happened if David, instead of concentrating on the giant, concentrated on his big brother who was attacking him? He just said, it's all right, man. It was just a question. And he moved on. We need to learn how to choose our battles and choose the one that God has sent us to fight, which is the Goliath in the picture. Woo! Can you say amen this morning? All right. Don't get stuck fighting the unnecessary battles. So really quick, Saul hears about this. Who is this that's saying all this stuff and calls him? David steps forward, and Saul says, verse 31, who is this? It's the cheese boy. It's the Uber Eats guy. It's the Uber Eats guy that wants to actually fight. He goes, you can't go. You're just the youth. You're a kid. You're the cheese guy. And what is David's response? It's all right. I tend sheep. Listen to that. Listen to his first response. It's like you saying, it's like NFL game. And your team's losing, and you run onto the field with your pads and helmets and say, put me in, coach. Why? Who are you? I was just playing Barbies with my daughter. Can you imagine that? So I tend sheep. I tend sheep. And that didn't convince Saul. So then David goes and he says, verse 34, and he starts responding. He goes, but David said to Saul, your servant was tending the father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went out after them. I attacked them, rescued it from its mouth, and when he rose up against me, I seized them by his beard and struck and killed them. Your servant killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the Lord. So there he explained, hey man, I don't just hang out with sheep. Look, I kill lions and bears. And that still didn't get Saul saying, all right, go. He had to give him a third explanation. Last one, verse 37. David said, the Lord. Everybody say the Lord. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion, paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and may the Lord be with you. So, okay, David, go ahead, go. We know God is with you. But now, try on this. So Saul puts his armor. We know the story, and it didn't fit him. It didn't fit him. Maybe it was too big. Maybe it was too loose. David was too skinny. The thing is, it didn't fit him. And David goes to the brook and grabs 5 stones. And that's where we see the story. That's where we started this morning, and see what the Lord wants to show us from this. We get to the fight, and look at this. When Goliath sees, verse 41, Goliath sees that he doesn't look like a warrior. What is the enemy worried about? What he looks like. What does the enemy want you to concentrate on when you're facing your Goliath? What it looks like. What did we learn from the previous chapter? God doesn't look at the outward appearance. God looks at the inside. So Goliath sees David coming and says, what? You coming at me with sticks? Don't you know I'm a warrior? And let's read it. He goes, let me see, verse 41. Philistine came upon and approached David, and the shield bearer in front of him says, when the Philistine looked and saw, he was seeing the outward appearance, saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy with a handsome appearance. The Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you would come to me with sticks? And the Philistine, listen to this. This is important. The Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine also said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field. So he curses David. Do you know what he just did? When God was building up, it's significant theologically, because when God was building up, creating the nation of Israel, he told Abraham, whoever curses you will be cursed. So the fact that Goliath cursed them, that was just death upon him already. And check this out. In Leviticus 24:16, blasphemy against God, and this is a precursor to what's coming up. Blasphemy against God, which is what Goliath had been doing for 40 days, it was a capital offense and was punishable by stoning. Do you get it? Look at God's comedic side. What Goliath was doing was punishable by stoning. And how is he going to die? By stoning. Ooh, God has a sense of humor. So, verse 45, and this is the point of the story. This is the point of the story. This is what the story is about. It's not about the fight. We know what happens. But it's about this. Verse 45 to 47, David's speech is the point of the story. 45, David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, which you have taunted or defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you, and I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God of Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. 7 times David references the Lord. This is his. The Lord will fight because it's the Lord fight, and he will get the glory. I know I'm little. I know I just have a stick. I know it doesn't look good for me, but the Lord will fight for me because this is his battle, and your Goliath is not your battle. It's the Lord's battle. And if we see like the Lord sees, we need to learn not to see the outward appearance, but to see that this fight is the Lord's. I'm almost done. The fight in verse 48 to 49, it looks like the advantage is on Goliath's side, but it's not. He surprised Goliath. I imagine David running up and then holding back, kind of when a basketball player drives the lane, and all of a sudden he pulls back for the jumper. You know what I'm talking about? And the defensive guy stuck there with his ankles broken and everything. You see the shots going up. I see that because Goliath had never seen the stone and the sling. All he saw was a stick. It surprised Goliath. Came out of nowhere. These stones would come out almost 100 miles per hour if they were thrown correctly. Even if it was 50, even if it was 25 miles per hour. Imagine a stone hitting you at 25 miles per hour. But these would come out at about 100. The researchers say this stone must have been the size of a tennis ball. Imagine a stone the size of a tennis ball hitting you at 100 miles per hour. There was no chance Goliath could survive this. David didn't win in spite of being small, but because he was small. Not in spite of his weakness, but because of his weaknesses. I'm almost done. The very thing meant to come against the people of God is turned and used against the enemy. He said he took his sword and cut his head off. Everything the enemy wants for evil, God turns it around for you. Genesis 50. Verse 20, it says, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about the present result to preserve many people alive. The Israelites ran the Philistines out of their land and distributed all of their riches. Now, if you give me 2 minutes, I'm going to finish this up here for you. How does this apply to us? Usually, like we started today, usually the application is simple. Hey, you, David, Goliath is your fears. It's your weaknesses. Go out and kill your fears. Yes or no? How many have heard that version? That's not the point of the story here. And usually this is at the last night of a camp or a revival meeting. Come on, go out and beat your Goliath. And your eating disorder, that's your Goliath. Your lust is your Goliath. Your fear of serving God is your Goliath. Your disobedience, your next door neighbor is your Goliath. And he gives you so many of these things. And you think of yourself, and I think of myself as David. But we aren't David in this story. Does that surprise you? Because we're used to people telling us and preachers telling us, you're David. And the problems are your Goliath. But no. Listen to this. This is all it is if we do that, it's a pump-up speech. That's all it is. It's a pump-up speech. Yeah, you can do it. Come on. But pump-up speech don't work for us. They don't work for people who think. It works for kids. Hey, man, you can do it. Go. And the little kid goes, yeah, I can do it. And that's it. But it doesn't work for you and me. A pump-up speech, it just gets you pumped up. And that's okay for camp. That's okay at church. But what happens when we get home? What happens when we face reality and Goliath comes back? And the lust comes back, and disobedience comes back, and whatever disorder we have, what happens then? What happened to the pump-up speech? See, David didn't come in as a cheerleader. He didn't come in and say, come on, guys, don't you know Israel is number one? Give me an I, give me an N. He didn't come in as a cheerleader. A pump-up speech is not going to work. If we're honest, we're not like David. In this story, we're like Israel. You and I, most of the time, are like Israel. We're powerless. We're helpless. We can beat a lot of enemies. There's a lot of enemies we can beat. But we all have some that get to us, and we can't win over them. But in the midst of that, of our depravity, of our helplessness, of our impotentness, of we can't do anything about it, God doesn't send a pump-up speech. God sends, listen to this, He sends a substitute. God sends a man between. God sends a champion who will step out for us, who will fight for us, who says, I will do what you cannot do, and my victory will count for you. Let me have you stand to your feet this morning as we close. You and I aren't David in this story. We're Israel. We need a David. See, but David, We don't need a pump-up speech that's going to say, come on, guys, you can do it. Go through your week, do it. Because most of us get to Monday, we're like, or Sunday night, and we're like, man, we forgot what the preaching was about. Anybody else or just me? Okay? Or we get to Monday, and that thing we said, yeah, we're going to beat it, beats us again. Because we were stuck with getting pumped up. The reality is, as the people of God, as the people of Israel, we need a David to come in. We need a boy from Bethlehem to come and save us. See, the boy from Bethlehem, that's the point of the story. In our helplessness, God sent another boy from Bethlehem. He didn't look like a hero. There was greatness in him. He arrives lowly like a servant, not like we expected him to look. Although he existed in the very form of God, he emptied himself, took the form of a servant. He left his things behind. His brothers mocked him, just like David, and accused him of bad intentions. His claim seemed silly. You're a carpenter from Nazareth, and you say you're the Messiah? You're the cheese boy. How are you going to fight against him? He stepped out against our enemy, and he wasn't wearing armor. He was wearing a crown of thorns. He looked small, but he won, not in spite of his weakness or what the world considers weakness, but because of it. Because he was a servant, and he laid down his life for you and for me. Hebrews 2, let me read it to you, 14 to 15 says, therefore, since the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise also partook in the same, so that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is, the devil, and free those who through fear of death were subject to slavery all their life. Jesus stepped out as our champion, as our man between, as our substitute. He took on what looked like weakness. He took on our frailty. He took on death. He took on sin. What looks like weakness is actually strength, because in our weakness, he is strong. He says, I will take every sword the enemy meant for you and use it on him. My victory counts for you. He is our substitute. That's the gospel. That's the good news today, this morning. It's not, hey, clean yourself up, get yourself ready, get right, and maybe God will accept you. It's admit that you don't have it all together. Can anybody else admit that with me today? I don't have it all together. I have Goliath in my life that gets to me, man. It's admit that you don't have it together, that you need help, and fix your eyes on the King. David had already been anointed king. He was the king. Fix your eyes. Look at what he is doing, has done. And to end, Hebrews 12, 1 through 3 says, therefore, since we also have such a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us rid ourselves of every obstacle and the sin that so easily entangles us. Let us run with endurance the race set before us, looking only at Jesus, the originator, perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, sat down at the right hand of the Father at the throne of God. He considered himself, for consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. How do we avoid joining Saul? Saul had lost heart. How do we avoid that? It's not with the pump-up speech. Come on, guys, you can do it. No. We fix our eyes on Jesus. See, your problem is not with your husband, with your kids, with your coworker. It's the enemy. And what we got to do is, Jesus, what are you doing in this situation? You are bigger than this situation. I fix my eyes on you. I have a future that cannot be stopped by any difficulty in my life, because Jesus is in charge. The King has entered the battle. If he be Goliath, I can drive the Philistine out of my heart, not because of me, because I have a victorious King. We have the true David, the Son of David, Jesus Christ, the real champion, the man between. And I close with this. My enemy does not determine my story. My King